Welcome back again to the Bootleg Football Podcast. EJ, it's that time of year again. Our favorite and least favorite show of the season. This is the one that's going to age like milk. Pretty much no matter what, 80% of what we say today will be wrong, but we still got to do it. We still got to make predictions. We still have to predict every single division winner. We're going to predict Super Bowl matchup. We're going to predict all the year-end awards. We're going to do our best to try to be as correct as possible, which again is like batting 200. That's a good day for us. So give us some grace. And when you clip this and bring it back in 5 months to dunk on us, just be gentle. That's all I asked. EJ, before we get into it, how are you doing?
Yes, remember it was 5 months ago, but change is the constant in the NFL. Parity is great for the league. It also means exercises like this are extremely difficult to be, quote unquote, right at. And I still think it's a good exercise. I'm glad we do it. Look, if we didn't like it, we wouldn't do it. But I think it's important mentally to go through and say, with everything we know, with everything we studied over the summer, with everything that every team has done, where do we think the landscape of the league is right now? We know it's going to change. Injuries, bad luck, you name it, all those things will happen. But as of right now, it's a pretty good snapshot for where we think the league is on the eve of the season kicking off.
Before we get into our first 4-pack of divisions, which is the AFC, I do want to thank Underdog Fantasy for making this show possible, making all of our shows possible, actually. A few of you degenerates out there watched all 32 of our season preview shows, which were like an hour or an hour and a half each on every single team, which gives a lot of context for the picks you're going to hear today. And we would not have been able to make that without Underdog Fantasy. They are very invested in making content and funding content for people exactly like us that are extremely nerdy. So we thank them for that. If you're not already on Underdog, by the way, they do have a Travis Kelce free pick for this Thursday night's season opening game. And you can also get up to $1,000 in bonus cash on Underdog with promo code Bootleg. So check that out as well. They have a whole bunch of different fun pick'ems you can do this week. They have like vulture protection as well. So, you know, if you pick a touchdown.
Such a good idea.
Oh my God, it's amazing. I think it was Rudman's idea, by the way. I asked who came up with that, and they're like, Rudman. I was like, it's very Rudman.
As soon as I saw that, I was like, oh, this is so necessary. Everybody's going to love this.
It's brilliant. So for those of you who don't know what vulture protection is, again, I'm pretty sure Underdog is the only people that do it. If you pick, like, say, Saquon over, 0.5 rushing touchdowns, right? So basically, is Saquon going to score or not? Eagles get down to the 1 yard line. They do a tush push. They just refund it, and then you get credit because you got vultured, right? Like they know how bad that feels to get tackled at the 1 and then not get credit for the touchdown. So they put in vulture protection, which, fun fact, happened 14 times last year for the Eagles. So it's a pretty common occurrence. But anyway, check out Underdog. They got a lot of fun stuff going on. Again, you got that Travis Kelce free pick for this Thursday. And speaking of the Chiefs, let's get to our AFC 4-pack, pick and division winners. EJ, I'll let you start off with all 4 division picks for the AFC.
All right, we're going to go north, east, south, and west. Starting off in the north, I'm going to go with the Ravens. I think they were a dominant team last year, and I don't think they even played to their maximum. We'll talk about your pick when we get there and why I didn't go that way, but it's Ravens for me in the north. In the east, and I know there's going to be a lot of hue and cry about this one, Dolphins. I think Mike Mack learned a lot of lessons from last year. He thought he had it. He didn't. Reminds me a lot of a young Sean McVay in that way. Thought he had it, didn't, made a bunch of changes. I think the Dolphins get over the hump this year. I think the Bills have a good shot at making the playoffs this year, but I don't know if they're going to win the division. They snuck in last year after the offensive coordinator change. They're going to be a very strong team. They're going to be there in the end, but I think the Dolphins pip them this year in a reversal. In the South, I've got your Texans. I believe in D'Amico, and I think CJ is just going to keep right on rolling. And in the West, look, this is the most pro forma pick in pro sports, I think, right now. As long as Patrick Mahomes is on the field and even half healthy, this is the Chiefs.
You can't not pick the Chiefs at this point.
Right.
Like, if you pick anybody else to win the West, it's one thing if you take somebody else to go to the Super Bowl. Fine. I can understand that. If you pick somebody else to win the West, Like, you just want attention at this point. Like, they are the best team, if not in the league, in the division, until proven otherwise.
Proof's in the pudding. They played really average football for more than half of last year and still won the championship, and they got better. So if you're not picking the Chiefs, I need to know why and show your work.
In a couple years, after the Harbaugh conversion is fully done in a couple of seasons, I could see the Chargers making a push. But now, no, it's Kansas City. Best quarterback, at least right now, potentially ever, by the time his career is done, in Patrick Mahomes. Very, very, very good offensive line. And, if their one weakness was tackle, I think Kingsley Suamataia might have something to say about that. He's been having a really, really tremendous summer. They have the best interior trio in the entire NFL. They have a ton more speed at the receiver position, which they didn't have before. You still got Travis Kelce. They got a backfield that I think is really sneaky fun with Pacheco and Steele. I mean, the defense is the defense. They can rush the passer. And Pirine. Yep. And actually, I think they were 4 deep. I think they're carrying 4 running backs going into the season too, which is interesting. It's a loaded team. It's a loaded team. So naturally, I picked them to win the West as well. For me, in the South, the wounded Texans fan in me thought about, okay, maybe the Colts are going to explode. Mm-hmm. And I think Anthony Richardson is going to have a tremendous season. But I let myself be optimistic. I let myself be positive, and I picked Houston to win it. Usually when there's this much hype for the Texans, by the way, it doesn't work out. So I'm fully prepared and almost interested to see how we fuck this up this time, because it's going to happen.
A deep fascination.
Now, it's gonna we're gonna find a way to mess it up because we're the Texans. But for now, based on the information we have now, I am gonna pick the Texans to win because they got the best quarterback in the division. They got, when they're healthy, on paper, a good offensive line. The defense is fast and aggressive and disciplined. DeMeco Ryans is a tremendous coach. They got tons of weapons. There's a lot going for them, right? Wouldn't count out the Colts from still making the playoffs because I think Anthony Richardson's going to be that guy. But for now, I'll pick the Houston Texans to win it. In the North, I can't remember what order you went in, by the way. So I'm just kind of winging it. Fine. In the North, I'm going to go with the Cincinnati Bengals. I feel like, and we said this in the offseason preview series, I feel like the Bengals are the forgotten team in the AFC. And I still, even with all of our praise that we gave them, I still think even I was underrating them. And I kind of went through and I looked at the rosters and I love their coaching staff. And I just thought, okay, there's been so much brain drain in Baltimore, over the last 8 months, right? With losing all those coaches, they lost some talent as well. And it's Baltimore, they're always going to draft well, but I really feel like the 2023 Ravens are going to be seen similar to the Bills from the year before, where that was the year, right? That was the year to do it. And even though I still think Baltimore is going to be an amazing team, they're going to be in the playoffs, I just feel like this year, since he's a little bit stronger, a little bit more well-rounded, a little bit more explosive, at least at the skill position players, and I'm going to favor them slightly to win the AFC North. And that brings us to the AFC East. I really, really wanted to pull the trigger on somebody else. I really did. Because it almost feels boring at this point to just say, well, Josh Allen. But Josh Allen, that's the reason. He is one of the only quarterbacks in the NFL that can go toe-to-toe with Patrick Mahomes and put the cape on and genuinely beat anybody in the NFL almost by himself. He is a Paul Bunyan type figure in the NFL where he can single-handedly carry that offense when the rest of the offense isn't working. As long as you have Josh Allen, you have a shot, right? Mm-hmm. At the same time, this is a team that for the first time in years, maybe since early career Josh Allen, where they had that, great defense and run game and everything like that, where they kind of took the ball out of his hands when he was still growing and developing in the league before his breakout. This is the first time since that time in his career where they've built the team to win without him being a superhero. You know, they built the team to win with yards after catch, to win with a strong run game, to win with a strong play action pass game. Obviously still having that strong defense because Sean McDermott's always going to have strong defenses. I think their special teams are going to be really, really good. It feels like the Bills are a much, much more well-rounded and resilient roster right now than even they were a couple years ago. And even if they don't win the same amount of games as Kansas City, even if they don't win the same amount of games as Cincinnati, I still think that they are going to be a potential like Avengers level threat for those teams because for the first time in a while, Josh Allen can just sit back and play point guard and almost kind of win in that Chiefs type style that we've seen over the last couple of years when they won back-to-back rings where, again, Mahomes only had to make like 4 crazy throws a week, and then they kind of won with dink and dunk and, not overwhelming run game, but like they would rip off explosive plays on the ground with Pacheco and everything like that, and they had a very, very good defense. Like they didn't ask Mahomes to carry them over the last 2 years other than 4 to 5 plays per game, and they won. The Bills are now built like that. And I see them, even though they've lost so many franchise staples since last season, I think they're built better now. And I think they're built more sustainably. I think they're built in a way that should bring more success in January, believe it or not. And I just think they're a better team now. So I'm still picking them to win the East. I really thought about going a different direction, but ultimately, this is a team that has a superhero quarterback that doesn't have to be a hero all the time. And that is a very dangerous thing.
I think on the offensive side of the ball, you're absolutely correct that they are built in a much more well-rounded way. We started to see them round into form for that when Joe Brady took over as the offensive coordinator, and then in the personnel decisions in the offseason as well. The offense is incredibly diverse and is not going to rely on Josh Allen superhero ball really cleanly. Where I worry about is the other side of the ball. When we saw Kansas City play that style, their defense was incredibly strong. I worry about the back half of the Buffalo defense, the linebackers, and there's been so much change in the secondary. Like, again, franchise stalwarts at corner and safety and linebacker, not going to be there. And they have good young players, but it takes a while for those guys to develop. So I think the Bills always have a good defense is going to be true, but maybe lesser so. And so the offense, which is better and more balanced, is going to have to hold it up a little bit more. I'm not predicting a fall for Buffalo. I know a lot of Buffalo fans are, all this youth and this is going to be an off year. I don't think so. I think they're going to be there. I think they're going to be in the playoff hunt because, again, with Josh Allen and the balance, he can make up for a lot, even a defense that has some holes in it. But I don't know that they challenge for the division because of that this year. So if it's an off year for Buffalo, it's off, but only a little bit. I'm not predicting a fall or a huge trough. They're going to be there. And again, if you get hot at the end of the year and Josh is playing well and the young guys are rallying and believing, they could make a deep run in the playoffs. I believe that. I know there are people that think there's no chance for that to happen for Buffalo this year. Don't count me among them. But I do think, given the right roll of the dice, it'd probably be the Dolphins for the division win, and then we'll see what happens.
I saw a lot of Bills fans, not to go too long on Buffalo, I saw a lot of Bills fans that when Milano got hurt, they basically threw in the towel. They're like, oh my God, it's going to be that kind of year. Like, we're screwed. Take it off, But at the same time, Terrell Bernard still exists, and he's an amazing young player. Yep. And they also got Dorian Williams, who I thought extremely highly of coming out of the draft. And I don't think there's a team, or at least there's very few teams in the league that I think are better at scouting and developing linebackers than the Buffalo Bills. Like, they invested highly in that position one time with Edmonds, and he ended up being their third best linebacker.
And they did a tremendous development job with him. Like, he needed a lot of development. He was basically Josh Allen on defense. Incredibly talented, physically wild, very young. And it took 3 years, but they got there. Like, you got to see him basically at his peak before he left Buffalo. So they did a great job with him. So even the highly drafted ones, they've done a great job developing with. So I have faith that they can do it. It's a question of how fast they can do it.
Yeah, I believe in the coaching staff and I believe in the quarterback. And maybe it sounds kind of reductive, but this league comes down to coaching staff and quarterback 90% of the time. And they got a pretty darn good one. And that's a good transition, by the way, to my NFC division picks, which follow a pretty similar theme of coaching staff plus quarterback equals winning a lot of games. I'm also going to start with the NFC North. And as a Bears supporter, this really, really hurts, but I kind of have to. I'm picking the Packers to win the North. I really enjoy the Detroit story. I have to think Detroit's going to be in the playoffs. I'd be willing to bet they're going to be a 5 seed. And a very, very strong 5 seed that could beat anybody in the NFC. But when stacking all the NFC North rosters against each other, they're all pretty strong. Like, they really are. Like, there's not a bad roster anywhere in this division. In fact, I'd say they're all at minimum above average, and in some cases, extremely good. And so it came down to the ultimate tiebreakers in football. Who's the guy pulling the trigger, and who's the one calling the plays for the guy pulling the trigger? The Packers have the best combo of that in the entire division. One of the best combos in the entire conference between Jordan Love and Matt LaFleur. And I think Caleb is going to be tremendous. I think Jared Goff is tremendous. I think Dan Campbell is a great coach. I think Ben Johnson is a great OC. You know, I think Minnesota with Kevin O'Connell and Brian Flores, like, there's a lot of good coaches in this division. But Matt LaFleur is that guy. And he's proven time and time again, he is that guy. He is in that elite echelon of not just play callers, but just head coaches in terms of running a program, running an organization, developing youth. Like, this team is still the youngest team in the league, by the way. It feels like it's been that way for a couple years now, but they're still the youngest team. And were it not for, I mean, I'm talking literally 2 plays in that playoff game against the Niners last year, they probably would have beat them. And hell, they might have gone to the Super Bowl with the youngest team in the league. So I look at this Packers squad, and again, it pisses me off because their development timeline was like half a year of being sort of kind of shaky, and that was it. And then they went back to being elite again. But I can't deny what my eyes see, which is a great young quarterback, a phenomenal coach, youth and explosiveness all over the roster. They're extremely deep at receiver. It's the Packers, so I mean, they could build an offensive line at a 7th round picks and it'd be a top 12 unit. And the defense has some young guys that I really, really like as well, especially when it comes to their pass rush. So, like, do I think they're going to ultimately make the Super Bowl? Probably not. Do I think they're going to win the NFC North? Yes. So that is my diatribe. Before I get into the rest of them, as a fellow Bears fan, do you have a response to that?
I do. And a lot of it I agree with. Love is good. The sample size is small. Goff has continued to get better, and I believe is continually underrated because of how he started. Like, the beginning of his career is not the same as the last 3 years of his career. The roster in Detroit is incredibly strong. And, like, does Ben Johnson not exist? Like, he is not the overall head coach. He has not taken that step yet. But in terms of offensive play callers, like, I think he is the equal of LaFleur. And that is incredibly high praise because I have nothing but respect for Matt LaFleur. He is, in my opinion, the best head coach in the NFC North. And the job he did with Love is incredible. What you talked about, youth and diversity, is all there. I think for the first time in a long time, Detroit Green Bay games are like must-see TV. Like, I'm going to be glued to those games to see how they turn out. Because if one team blows out the other, and I don't care which one it is, it's going to be very interesting to see why that happened. Because right now I see them as incredibly evenly matched. And, I'm not going to throw tomatoes at your Packers pick because it could very well happen. They are that good. Did I pick them? No, I didn't, but we'll get there.
For the East, the NFC East. I thought about going Dallas here, but there's just vibes are off.
So much.
So much going on there.
That was the reason I didn't pick the Bengals in the AFC, was just like the vibes are not great. Like, I love Joe, but I'm looking at the Bengals. I think they're talented. I think all the things you said about the Bengals are true. Not to jump back in conferences, but like, I'm not sure about the vibes in Cincinnati, and I feel exactly the same way about Dallas.
Even though they paid CD, like, and that's the thing, is I fully understand, okay, he's back in the building. Holdout hammy is a real thing. Like, that happens all the time where a guy's like away from the facility the entire offseason, not training with the team, didn't go through joint practices with other teams, which are essentially like scrimmages, didn't go through any preseason games, hasn't played any real football since January. And then he signs a contract, he's in the building, and literally pops a hammy in like the first 20 snaps. Like, that happens all the time. Or it's a guy who's coming off injury, doesn't have a real ramp-up period, and then he's active for week 1 and he immediately gets re-injured. Like, this is exactly when soft tissue injuries happen. So it's like, CD's signed, but there is going to be a ramp-up period there. I would not be surprised if his route tree, I don't want to call it limited, but if they don't have him really going full gas, like deep down the field to the same frequency that they would in, like, say, November when he's back in quote unquote football shape, like, there might actually be a ramp up period there for him. Not to mention the Dak thing, not to mention the Micah thing. I don't know, man. The vibes are just weird in that building. Every time Jerry gets behind a microphone, like, he just says something, you're like, dude, come on, really?
And then, like, conversely, their offensive line, which everybody thought was going to be a shambles, looks like it's actually going to be really good. So it's like, great over here, and I don't know about it over here. And you just kind of
see, that part doesn't surprise me, though, because it's the Cowboys. Like, anytime the Cowboys pick an offensive lineman in the first 3 rounds, like, okay, yeah, they're going to be good. It's one of the only things you can practically guarantee about that team is they know how to scout and develop offensive linemen. Now, as for do they know how to retain their star players, that's a whole different conversation.
Yeah.
So ultimately, when looking at the NFC East, I had a whole bunch of other, not a whole bunch. I had 3 other, not even 3. I had 2 other viable options because I'm not picking the Giants. Yeah. Between Washington and Philly, those were the 2 realistic options, and I went with Philly begrudgingly, almost. I'm not a big fan of Nick Sirianni. I'm really not. He kind of reminds me of that scene in Office Space. It's like, what do you do here? Like, what is your thing, right? Because you're not a great offensive play caller. Like, clearly Steichen was the secret sauce in their Super Bowl year. As for, like, motivation and leadership, I kind of feel like they get that more from, the elder statesman in the room. Jason Kelsey once upon a time before he retired, Fletcher Cox before he retired. Like, I always felt like the leadership component came from the players. Obviously, Jalen Hurts as well. So it's like, I don't really know what Nick Sirianni's role in the organization is, other than, like, pissing off fans. So it really comes down to looking at the roster that Howie built, yep, and the assistant coaches. Last year, the assistant coaches were the downfall of this team because Nick Sirianni's not going to swoop in and fix the offense himself. He's not that kind of coach. And unfortunately, well, actually, let me rephrase that. He is that kind of coach, but not in a good way, right? Because there were reports that he was meddling in the offense, but he's actually not that great of an offensive coach. So him meddling actually made them worse. So now he's backing off this year, and they bring in Kellen Moore to be the OC. They bring in Fangio to be their DC, which is what they wanted to do a year ago, but because of there's a whole lot going on there, so that didn't happen. So now they got stronger coordinators than they had last year, and coordinators were absolutely the downfall of the roster last year. So in a lot of ways, they've fixed their biggest problem. I'm still not 100% sold on Philly because, again, I do feel like if you're stacking Sirianni up against, like, the best coaches in the NFC, they would eat him alive. LaFleur, Shanahan, Campbell. Like that is just such a mismatch. Like even McCarthy, I think, is a better head coach than Nick Sirianni. I really
fired.
do. I really do.
I realize, but I also realize how you feel about McCarthy, so the depth of that cut is very evident to me.
I'm going through all the NFC coaches, like Raheem Morris. I think Raheem Morris is a better coach. Maybe even Canales is going to end up as a better coach, just going off of like his history as like a developer of offensive talent and like a quarterback guy. Like, I don't know. This sounds like so negative because I'm picking them to win the division, but I just don't feel good about it because it's almost entirely off the strength of the roster that Howie built and the upgrade at OC and DC. But ultimately, when they get to January, like I just think Nick Sirianni is going to get out-coached. I really do. I don't think they're going to make the Super Bowl again. They're still going to be in it, but I feel like this is like Bill Belichick's top destination because you plot Bill Belichick in that chair right now, and they're probably Super Bowl favorites.
It could be. We'll see. I mean, there's a couple of numbers I'll get to. Let's finish up your NFC picks, and then when we come back around to the Eagles, I'll try and part the fog a little bit for you and see if I can make you feel better about them.
Well, I mentioned the NFC South being being one of the weirdest divisions in football, right? Everybody's all in on the Falcons, which means the Falcons are not going to win the division because anytime you think somebody's going to win the NFC South, they don't win the NFC South. And even then, I do think that there is a strong case for my pick to win that division, and that is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, beyond the fact that they won it last year. But if you're looking at the roster from last year that won this division, the real major hole was interior offensive line. Like that was their Achilles heel in a lot of ways. They couldn't run the ball because they got pretty much zero push up front from the interior of that offensive line. That was, their biggest hole, and they plugged it in one draft pick. Like they plugged that hole in one pick. And so if you're looking beyond that one issue they had, which was interior offensive line, you're like, okay, well, what else do they got? They have really good receiving weapons. They have a young running back in Rashad White, who I really, really like. They have a great tackle in Wirfs, like one of the best tackles, not just in the conference, but in the league. They have an absolutely hellacious young group of pass rushers. Like Yaya Diaby, I think, could be a breakout star this year. Levante David is still playing at a high level, what is it, year 14 or something like that, and he's still playing at an extremely, extremely high level that you don't see any mid-30s linebacker play at. He's just like the ageless wonder. You have a bunch of really, really good DBs. I feel like they have like 3 different guys who could be top-tier nickels. They have one of the best safeties, if not the best overall safety in the NFL in Winfield. There's just a lot to love about this overall roster. And I get everybody's on the Falcons train right now, but they're ignoring Tampa as a result. And I do not think this is a team that should be ignored. So they're my pick to win the NFC South. And then wrapping it up with the NFC West, I think over summer I picked the Niners to win it, if I recall correctly, when we did the Niners episode. A lot's happened since then.
There have been some changes.
There's been some developments, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if Ayuk is going to be on this roster in by the time this episode even comes out. Like we're recording this on, August 29th. He could be traded like in the next 10 minutes. I don't know. Trent Williams hasn't shown up yet either. He wants a new deal. And he's not showing up until he gets that new deal. So that's 2 of your 3 best players on offense that are dissatisfied.
Mm-hmm.
And that matters. Like, that absolutely matters. I still think they're going to make the playoffs, but if this Trent Williams thing becomes a thing and bleeds into the regular season, you don't have your best offensive lineman, arguably your best player on the team, how could I possibly pick you to win the division? A very loaded division, mind you, where you got the Rams in, I think it's week 2 is when they play the Rams. And that's a crucial game for deciding who's going to win this division, right? Not to mention the Ayuk thing, if he's even on the roster, if they trade him away, I don't know what's going to happen with that. So I think the late August 49ers conversation is a very different one than we had in mid-July. And so
Yes.
as a result, I'm picking LA to win the division. I think it's a much safer bet, even though they traded away Ernest Jones, and I really, really hated that. They seem to adore Omar Speights. Like that trade for Ernest Jones doesn't happen if they didn't think Speights could play right now. And apparently they do. So overall, I look at the Rams and they have the best quarterback in the division in Stafford. They have great receivers. They have great offensive line. They have a hellacious young pass rush, just like Tampa, but even more than even Tampa has. They have a young linebacker who they seem to believe in a lot in Speights, and I think they have some fun players in the secondary too. It's a very, very loaded roster. And in the absence of having answers to all the questions for San Francisco, they're my pick to win it.
I will go in reverse order, and I have the same trepidations about San Francisco that have come about because of recent events. Again, Kyle Shanahan is always going to have this team in the hunt. He's always going to have them prepared. They are always going to be there in the end. But the teams that make it over the top are the ones that get the breaks. And he's made breaks for this team over and over again. Again, NFC Championship game, Super Bowl, should have gone to the Super Bowl, but the whole team got injured. Like, these are the last 3 years for the Niners. So it's hard to pick against them, but boy, there's a lot of turmoil, and it's affected me and my choice in the same way that it's affected you. Rams were in consideration for me, but boy, if you go chalk on these lists, you're going to get smoked. And sometimes you just kind of got to go, So I'm actually going to pick the Seahawks. I'm going to say Mike Mack is going to pull a DeMeco Ryans. And the thing that really tilted this for me was, you know me, I'm a devout preseason watcher. And we went over in the last episode the rules for watching the preseason, what you can take away and what you can't. And they opened it up for 2 series. They opened up the offense for 2 series. They let Ryan Grubb say, okay, call a couple that you want to. And they scored in like 5 plays. They had a 25-yarder to JSN and a 22-yarder to DK. And he was like, you want me to keep going? And they were like, no,
right,
that's
now
cool.
Put the Aston back in the garage.
They're like, shut it down. And if you combine what we think Mike Mack's defense is going to be and have seen flashes of during the preseason, we've seen things in the secondary. Like, this has been already a very changed defense, an aggressive, just threatening unit. And then you add Grubb and the Aston at full throttle, and that's a dangerous combination. There's a real chance that if they come out and take a couple games here in a very competitive division, they could be in it at the end. And you and I both believe that Mike Mack is the same kind of coach as a leader as DeMeco. We feel the same way about him moving into the head coaching role. And I'm looking at the talent, and I think about Geno a couple of years ago. I realized he did not have a great year last year, but I also think about the fact that there were, like, if you add it up at the end of the year, there were like 3 or 4 games where the Seahawks just didn't throw to DK. If you add up all the quarters where they just didn't even target him, which is insane given his production. Do you think Grubb's going to do that? Do you think Grubb's going to throw to DK like twice a game? I don't think that's going to happen. Do you think he's not going to use
both of those targets being in the last 4 minutes of the fourth quarter?
Do you think that, like, that seems like such a crazy memory? So if you have a, Ferrari at full throttle offense and you've got Mike Mack's defense, you got a real chance to turn this team around very, very quickly. I believe in McVay. I certainly believe in Stafford and that receiving core. Obviously, Shanahan's going to be there. I think the Cardinals are going to be plucky too. It's one of those divisions that has really changed over the last year and is going to be a ton of fun to watch. But I'm going to throw my hat in the ring with the Seahawks. I think it's possible. And again, what we think right now in August is not going to be what happens necessarily at the end of the year. So this is kind of my, if everything aligns, I think this could happen. I think it's reasonable. For the South, the South was my throw one die up in the air, let it bounce on the table and see what happens division. I'm going to go with the Falcons because we've all said the Falcons have a lot of talent. We believe that Kirk is going to come out of the gate hot, but even if he doesn't, again, Penix looked sharp and everybody thrashed the Falcons. We were very confused by the pick of Michael Penix up high and using that asset in that direction after 6 weeks after signing Kirk Cousins. But even if Kirk Cousins falters or gets hurt or has that, recurrence of some other soft tissue because he's compensating because he's not fully healed yet, and they have to bring in Penix, I think the Falcons are in better shape than many teams in the NFL if that occurs. I think Penix will play well quickly and, again, is surrounded by weapons. You've heard a lot about the Falcons if you've been listening to the NFL offseason dialogue. Bijan is a fantasy darling, as someone that might lead the league in scoring. All the other weapons they have. I think the Falcons are going to win that division, which of course means they're not going to, because as you said, when you think somebody's going to win the NFC South, they're not. But I'm going to pick the Falcons. Getting back to the East, I'm going to pick the Eagles as well. And I feel a little bit better about it than you do. I don't necessarily love Nick Sirianni. I don't think I'm quite as down on him as you are, but here's the thing, and this is the value of doing the offseason preview episodes, is the taste we had in our mouth at the end of the season of Philadelphia was horrible because they fell off as hard as any team in recent memory. They just absolutely hit the cliff and didn't stop free falling pretty much till the end of the season. As bad as they played, as awful as that was, the offense was top 10 in every metric. Like top 10.
Here's the thing. Yes, but you couldn't watch that team without just being pissed off.
Right. Because we knew one half of that team was dropping the other half. The defense was never going to hold them up after all the smoke and mirrors broke.
I'm even talking about the offense too. No, I'm even talking about the offense too, because it was such a basic high school offense in terms of how they aligned, their complete refusal to use motion to help out the receivers whatsoever. Every time they lined up, everybody knew what they were running. I mean, for God's sake, they had a 43% inside zone rate. That's absurd. It's absolutely absurd. There was zero variety. In fact, I actually pulled numbers on this because I'm working on a project literally on Saquon's edition. So they were 43% inside zone. That was first by a mile. They were 31st in outside zone. They were 32nd in man concepts. They were 31st in power. They were third in counter, but it was 11%. And they were first in sneak at 10%. They ran more sneaks last year than they ran pin and pulls. Yes. Like, you don't have to really prepare for a whole lot against that team.
And really there's a lot of teams like that in the NFL. We talk about teams on defense that they, you fully know what you're going to get, and they're going to line up in what you expect, and they're going to try and out execute you. And even with all that stuff you just said, which is all valid, those numbers are all true. They're the number one rushing offense, the 7th passing offense, and the 2nd in points scored. But you can say what you want about it being like, I understand, but you could say what you want about it being basic and easy to prepare for and tough to watch and everything else. Those are elite numbers.
They're elite because they played with different math than everybody else. And this is where I caution people against comparing the Eagles' numbers to everybody else, because they played with a 4-down offense. They're the only team in the NFL that played with a 4-down offense. They didn't play for 3rd and 1. They played for 4th and 1 because they knew they were going to pick it up. And I get it. It worked, but at what cost? Like, this team should have been way more explosive. They should have been way more efficient. But because Nick Sirianni could sit there and be like, well, it doesn't matter if we call shitty plays, because as long as we get within 3 feet of the first down, we're going to pick it up. It's like, yeah, Nick, that works until it doesn't. And then you lost like 6 of your last 7 games because everybody figured out you ain't got anything else. So I say this again as somebody who picked them to win the division. I fucking hate watching the Eagles play because they should be so much better than they are. And they're not until they get rid of him.
I'm not going to say that they're going to close the gap of how much their own fans hate watching them as opposed to how good they should be. Not going to say they're going to close that gap. I'm not promising miracles here, but their offense was good. better than average by far. Their defense was horrendous. And no, they didn't have a lot of variety. And yes, they should have been better for all the talent that we've lauded Howie for collecting over all these years. On the defensive side, too, he's collected defensive talent as much or more than offensive talent. And that certainly didn't pay off for him last year. But like the Bucs, they fixed their problems. They picked corners. They needed to. Their linebacking core does not look like absolute ass this year to start the year off. Again, the way we see it in the beginning. I'm not saying you have to love the Eagles. I don't love it either, but I don't hate it as much as you do. And I think they are going to be a very dangerous team because I don't love the vibes in Dallas. The Giants, I believe, are going to bring up the tail end of this division. And while Washington could be fun, I think they're going to be up and down fun. They are not going to be consistent fun. So whether they're second or third remains to be seen. And I think it will be fun either way. Unlike the Eagles, probably fun to watch. We'll see. More fun to watch than they have been in recent years. But I'm going to go with the Eagles in the East. And then as we get to the North, no, I did not pick the Packers. Yes, I did pick the Lions because speaking of rosters, Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell have done a tremendous job. I think Goff is underrated. They've added talent. It looks like Jameson Williams might finally justify some of the faith I had in him. The defense has added
any year now,
pieces.
right?
I know, any year. I'm just going to keep banging the table until it happens. We'll see. But I believe in Ben Johnson very, very strongly as one of the best play callers in the NFL. I don't think that's debatable. And they've added some defensive pieces to give, Hutch some help. And their young pieces are, in my mind, a little bit like Kansas City's young pieces. They played well as rookies, but now they're in year 2 and they're just going to play better. Jack Campbell's going to play better. Brian Branch is going to play better, which is kind of crazy because they played great as rookies. And they also dipped in and got corners. So, they're following Philly's lead there a little bit of, hey, we got burned on the outside. We need some help there. And they went and got it. So they were a very good team last year. I think they addressed a lot of the holes that we thought they had. And I'm going to pick them to repeat as division champs. Again, I'm going to be watching those Green Bay Detroit games much more closely than I have in years past because I believe both of them are going to be very meaningful.
All right, so there are all of our division winner picks. Again, quick little recap. In the AFC, I picked the Bengals to win the North. EJ picked the Ravens. In the AFC East, I picked the Bills. EJ picked the Dolphins. In the AFC South, we both picked the Texans. In the AFC West, we both picked the Chiefs. And then in the NFC for the North, I went with the Packers. EJ went with the Lions. In the East, we both, some begrudgingly more than others, went with the Eagles. The South, I went with the Bucs. EJ went with the Falcons. And in the NFC West, I went with the Rams. And EJ went with the Seahawks. So that is what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 out of the 8 divisions. We picked different winners. How about that? Who says there isn't parity in the NFL?
Yeah, exactly. I think that's less consensus than we've had in years past, but it speaks to a lot of the moves that a bunch of these teams have made and the fact that every year you can count on 4 teams that made the playoffs, not making the playoffs, and 4 teams that didn't, replacing them. And that is consistent every year. So when looking at these lists, you got to factor that in. If if like 7 of 8 are repeats for you, you're not going to be correct. Like 3 of yours are probably going to be wrong. So that's where I think some of the diversity comes in, and it's what makes the NFL a great sport.
So looking at the season-long awards, we have Coach of the Year, Offensive Rookie of the Year, Defensive Rookie of the Year, Offensive and Defensive Player of the Year, MVP, and we'll also pick a Super Bowl matchup at that. Let's start with Coach of the Year. Who's yours?
I'm going to go with D'Amico because I think he could have won it last year. He got some votes last year, and if they continue to ascend, if they put their stamp on, win the division in convincing fashion, get into the playoffs, and I would say at least win a game there and are competitive in the next one, it's very hard for me to see him not getting even more votes.
I'm going to go with a pick that's a little bit out there because I don't think a lot of people are talking about it, and that's Jonathan Gannon.
Let's go. Let's go.
I know you're a big Gannon guy. You're a big Gannon guy. This team played their asses off for him. last year.
Yes, they did.
And I think that matters. It really does. It shows that he had a lot of command in the room. He had the respect of his players. They never, ever quit on him. And I've said this multiple times. It kind of reminded me of like that first Dan Campbell year where they lost a lot of games because they weren't very good, but by God, they tried. And that's worth a lot. You can lose games. You can't lose the locker room. He didn't lose the locker room. And they've added a lot of talent. They've added a ton of talent. They didn't even have Kyler till week 10 last year, right? So you get a fully healthy Kyler. You get a receiving core that we love with Marvin Jr., Wilson, and Dortch as your top three. They got McBride and Ryman at tight end. They got two running backs that we love in Connor and Trey Benson, the other Trey. You have an offensive line that's steadily improved in terms of talent over the last 3 years. Each of the last 3 years, I think they've gotten a little bit better. It's a pretty respectable offensive line that was already pretty good at running the ball last year to begin with. You have Petzing at coordinator, who we really like as an up-and-coming OC. And then on defense, not that they don't have holes. They obviously have holes, but it's not as many as you think. Like they still do need depth at edge rusher, more than depth. I think they need help at edge rusher.
Yep.
But don't count out Xavier Thomas, rookie 5th rounder Xavier Thomas, to have a real impact in this edge rush rotation. Like he is really explosive. I'm not saying he's going to come out there and be like their number one edge, but he's going to contribute. And so I don't think the cupboard is bare there. The interior defensive line, I think, is all right. The secondary, I think, has a lot of exciting, explosive players that we really, really love. I think overall, if you're looking at this Cardinals team, they're probably a couple years away, but they're pretty solid. And I think a solid run from the Cardinals to the playoffs will earn Jonathan Gannon a very strong look at Coach of the Year, because this was a team that was borderline unwatchable less than 24 months ago. And now look at them.
A lot of people tuned out at the end of last year because, again, the Cardinals weren't having a ton of success. Kyler wasn't there, like you said, until later in the year. There was some interesting, fun, and creative stuff that Drew did in the first 4 to 6 weeks that really caught my eye, but they just sort of ran out of horses. They did not have enough horsepower to make it go, to make the system operate the way they wanted to. But yet they kept at it. They kept, rolling the rock uphill, whatever you want to say. That's really important. And now you've added firepower on both sides of the balls. And I think it's important to know that this is a handshake between GM and coach too. This is a GM setting up his coach by trading away picks last year, stockpiling picks for this year, saying in year 2, we're really going to take a jump. I'm going to bring you a lot more groceries to try and make the meal taste better. And that was in lockstep. They knew they were going to kind of have to take their medicine, fix the roster in year 1, get, some of the guys that weren't with the program off, get some younger guys and struggle through. And they did that together, knowing that, hey, we've traded these picks into the future. We're going to have a haul next year. We're going to have a high pick next year to really upgrade the offense. We're going to do the same with the defense. And it looks really good. It looks like they are primed to take a big jump in this second year of the new regime.
For the first time in a while, we're actually going to be talking about the Cardinals in the second half of the season. And that feels pretty good. I think that fan base deserves to be respectable for the first time in a while. That brings us to Offensive Rookie of the Year. I'm not going to beat around the bush. My pick is Caleb. I would be insane to pick anybody other than Caleb. And I say that as somebody who really thinks this overall quarterback class is going to be a pretty special one. Seeing what we saw in the brief time where they let Drake May throw the football down the field, I really like what we saw from him. I think Jaden Daniels had a fantastic preseason. I think Bo Nix has exceeded a lot of expectations. And I say that as somebody who had Bo Nix as a top 12 pick. He even exceeded my expectations. Oh, okay, I think this is going to work. JJ McCarthy in the quarter and a half that we got to see from him this year.
In that tiny little sample size.
Before the Minnesota sports curse came crashing down again.
Oh, you're blaming Minnesota for that?
Yeah, no, I think I'm just going to absolve myself.
Okay, just checking.
It's Minnesota.
Right.
Shit, even Penix looked good. Penix
looked
good. Yeah. before they shut him down for all of preseason because they're like, we'd rather Taylor Heineke get snaps so we could trade him.
Yeah.
I think this overall quarterback class is going to be so damn good. And yet Caleb is still easily, like not even a discussion, the best one. I think he is the guy that Chicago's been waiting for 100 years, literally a century. I think he is the guy. I think not just on field, but off the field. Like this kid, his leadership potential, and now that people are finally getting to see what he's actually like on Hard Knocks, like I'm telling you, everybody at USC was ready to hide a body for him. Like that's how much they love him in that building. He is a tremendous leader. He's a tremendous football player. Like he is the guy. He is the franchise. He is it. He is going to be their Patrick Mahomes. And I know that sounds hyperbolic, and I don't care because there is one quarterback prospect that I can remember since Andrew Luck that I felt confident enough to say that about, and I was right. And it was Joe freaking Burrow. Like Caleb is that caliber of prospect, right? Where he immediately validates that team. He immediately makes that team a real contender just by being there. So yeah, he's the offensive rookie of the year. I think every other quarterback in this class that went in the first round, I should say, that went in the first round specifically, is going to be good.
Yeah.
But Caleb is going to be more than good. Caleb is going to be special. So Chicago, thank God for David Tepper. That's all I'll say.
As I look at offensive rookie of the year, I look at two things. And the first one is talent. And the second one is opportunity. And there's a lot of talented offensive rookies that came out in this class. But not all of them are going to have the same opportunity. Caleb is going to have one of the greatest opportunities. Obviously, he was the number one overall pick. Obviously, he's very, very talented. And I believe all the things you just said about him. If Caleb stays healthy, plays the entire year, I believe he wins Offensive Rookie of the Year because the nod is always going to go to the quarterback over any other position. Now then, if that doesn't happen, the only other guy I think that has a real chance is Marvin Harrison Jr. because he too is considered that kind of talent in his respective role. He was the guy that a year ago, but he was going, well, when MHJ comes out, he's the guy. He's the number one receiver. We're talking about number two. People had different evaluations, but he too is going to have opportunity from day one. He is the number one in Arizona. There's no question. Like that's not even a discussion. When you look at a lot of these offensive and defensive rookies, everybody's like, oh, and we'll talk about defensive rookie of the year and kind of going to go out on a limb because it's not a guy that's penciled into a starting role right away. MHJ and Caleb, they're both a starter. They're both the alphas. They're both going to change their franchises. The nod will go to Caleb if he stays healthy and because he's a quarterback. And I believe that. But I think MHJ wins this. You talked about that, scarred Texans fan in you that doesn't want to say that the Texans are going to be great and win the division. I don't want to be the guy that says Caleb wins Offensive Rookie of the Year and then, something happens and we're like, So I'm going to say that MHJ wins it because I believe that he can too. Like that's not just some other guy.
You're just protecting your mental health at this point.
I am protecting my mentals. I'm following Money Lynch's advice here. Protect your chickens, protect your mentals. Take care of your chickens.
I mean, I get it though. I get it.
Like he had, those are the two guys that have the opportunity and the talent. And it's just going to come down to how that plays out, how the teams use them. But again, if Caleb stays healthy, plays the entire season, the roster that's been built around the talent that he has and has already displayed, he'll get it because he's a quarterback. And if he gets anywhere near 4,000 yards, which no Bears quarterback famously has ever done, he wins it in a landslide. It's not even close.
My only argument against Marvin is not even really an argument against Marvin. It's just looking at, okay, if Puka couldn't win it last year,
right?
Like, is a receiver ever going to do it?
Yeah, and that's, I mean, it's always
on.
When we talk about offensive awards and when we talk about MVP, this is the same refrain every year. There ought to be best quarterback and MVP, right? Because MVP is always going to go to a quarterback if it's even close, and sometimes when it's not, and other position players are going to have to do exceptional superhuman things and then probably still not win it. So,
yeah, the only reason why Garrett Wilson won it the year before is just because the only quarterback that was good enough to take that award away from him was Purdy, who didn't play till the second half of the year. But if Purdy played the entire year, he probably would have won.
Oh yeah, it's not close.
It's just it's hard
skewed
to win it as a non-quarterback, right?
Correct.
Even for somebody as good as Marvin. All right, defensive rookie of the year. There's actually a lot of really good options for this one. I went back and forth on some of the edge guys because I think Leatu Latu and Jared Verse are both going to have tremendous opportunities. Maybe even Dallas Turner, I think could as well. But ultimately, if we're talking about, okay, who is going to be the most consistently productive impact pass rusher in this class, who will also be on a defense that I think is going to be, if not built around him, at the very minimum, funneling opportunities to him to put up a ridiculous season, it's Byron Murphy II up in Seattle. Mike Mack found his Justin Madubuike, and I think he's going to produce like Justin Madubuike. And I'm talking immediately produce like Madubuike. This is a crazy, crazy talented 3 technique. I think it's very possible as a rookie, he puts up 8+ sacks, which for a rookie interior defender is not common, by the way. That is a very rare thing. I think he could do it. Not to mention, he's also a tremendous run defender too. Like, he is going to be the rock upon which that pass rush is built pretty much from day one. And I think Byron Murphy II, if you don't know the name, learn the name. He's going to be a star.
I fully agree with you. Byron Murphy is one of my 2 guys for this that I'm choosing between, and he is the aforementioned guy who is not currently penciled in as a starter.
Who'd you choose? Now I'm curious.
No. So this is between Murphy, because I believe what you said about Murphy is true, and I believe by the end of the season he will be the starter, and he is going to be one of those guys that makes the second half of the year push that is fresh in voters' minds, and therefore I think he's got a very good chance to win it. In fact, I think he does win it. The other guy, again, going with the talent and opportunity model, is Terrion Arnold. He is penciled in as a starter, is a very talented corner, is in a position of need. The team is going to lean on him. He's got one of his former teammates there in Brian Branch. I think he is one of those guys that is primed to come along very quickly. It is tougher for cornerbacks, especially if they're playing outside in their first year, to make the jump between college and the pros. The game is called differently in the pros, but if anybody could make that jump, I think it's Terrion. But I'm with you. I think Byron Murphy, even though he is not currently penciled in as a starter, is very quickly going to be, and by the end of the year is going to start picking up momentum that we see from rookies, where the light comes on not at the end of their first year. They don't make a sophomore jump. They make a 8-week jump. And for the last 8 weeks of the season, I think he's going to be an absolute terror. He's just going to keep getting better. He did last year at Texas. That's the same pattern he followed in his final year of eligibility at Texas. So I'm with you. I think Byron Murphy wins this thing, even though he is not currently penciled in a week before the beginning of the season as a starter.
That brings us to Offensive Player of the Year, also known as the award that we don't want to give to Patrick Mahomes, or else he'd win it every single year.
Right.
So it's got to be somebody else. Now, call me a homer if you want to, but I think this is like tailor-made for CJ Stroud, right?
Oh.
Of a quarterback who's going to put up ridiculous numbers. Like, we're pretty sure he's going to put up ridiculous numbers. Because A, he's one of the 5 best quarterbacks in the NFL. B, he might have the deepest overall receiving core in the NFL. C, you add in Joe Mixon, I think they're going to have a much more, if not explosive, stable run game than they did last year. The offensive line is healthier, and the defense, I think, is going to give him a lot better average field position than a lot of other top quarterbacks get around the NFL, because his defense is so damn good. So if you factor all those things together, to me, there is an opportunity here for CJ Stroud to push 5,000 yards, at least get damn close to it. There is an opportunity here for him to throw for 35, maybe damn near 40 touchdowns. That is an Offensive Player of the Year type resume. In fact, in most years, that's an MVP type resume. There's been a lot of MVPs that have not approached those numbers, but that is the type of season I think he can have. That being said, I chose a different quarterback for MVP for a very different reason, which we'll get into in a second. But I just want to lay it down. I think CJ Stroud is going to cement himself as a top 5 quarterback this year, and he's going to probably lead the league in passing, if I had to guess.
I don't think any of that is false. I don't think you said one wrong thing about CJ Stroud, even being a Texans homer. All that stuff is true. I went in a different direction. I think this comes down to Bijan and Tyreek. And Tyreek, because he's going to put
interesting.
Tyreek's going to put up ridiculous numbers. He wants that 2,000 yard mark. He believes he can get it. I think he probably could. I don't know whether or not he will. And Bijan is just this sort of sleeping giant. We know how good he is, both in the run game and the pass game. And I think that's very important if you're talking about a guy for this award. He's going to need to get yards in both ways. It's not the best runner or the best receiving back. It's a guy that can hurt you all over the field whenever he touches the ball and doesn't have a head coach seemingly actively working against him, but rather one that's like, go do your thing, man. That's why we got you. And that is going to turn Bijan's fortunes. And the way people talk about Bijan in the NFL and regard him as a player within the greater sphere of the league in a huge, huge way. Like if there was a bigger turnaround, it's like, it's not comeback player of the year. It's like image turnaround of the year. And if
I'd give him comeback player just for surviving Arthur Smith.
So if that's the case, we'll see. I think he's in for a monster season. I think he will propel the Falcons in a way that great offensive players like all the ones we're talking about, CJ Stroud, Tyreek Hill, great offensive players really move the needle for their teams, not just their offense. They put a lot of pressure on other teams in ways that very few players do. There's a handful of players like that in the league. I think both those guys are there. I think Tyreek pushes over the top and probably wins this. He has a little bit more name recognition. Bijan, is the newer guy, will get a lot of votes, right? Might not tip the scales. I think Tyreek wins Offensive Player of the Year.
Defensive Player of the Year. Again, a bunch of options here. I thought about going with, one of the edge rushers that's going to put up 14, 15 plus sacks. There's, I don't know, like 5-6 guys you can pick from for that.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I was like, okay, what about the best defensive player on one of the best defenses in the NFL for a team that's going to be in the national spotlight the entire time? Everyone's going to be watching every single game they play. He's going to have a lot of opportunities to make a big impression on all the people that cast those votes.
Yes.
That is Quinnen Williams.
Ooh.
Quinnen Williams from the New York Jets, best player on an extraordinarily talented team. And I don't say that lightly. He really is. I think if anybody can kind of pick up the mantle of Aaron Donald, of like that just crazy, unbelievably talented 3 technique that does everything at an elite level on every single down, every single distance, I think it's Quinnen Williams. I think he's the next best one in the NFL after AD's departure, and I'm including even Chris Jones in that. I think this is the year that he finally asserts himself as that, defensive player of the year caliber, all pro caliber, future Hall of Fame caliber defensive tackle. I really do think he's that good. And I think finally he's going to get credit for it now.
I went in a similar direction in terms of a lot of their games are going to be watched because they always are. And this player's been performing at an extremely high level, largely by himself. And he just got one of the biggest helping hands there is in the league. And that's Max Crosby with the addition of Christian Wilkins. Like, he does not have to be Superman anymore. We talked about this at the top of the podcast with Josh Allen. And Crosby is, I think, what's the opposite of resting on your laurels? Like, on grind 100% of the time, always. When we were at Shrine Bowl, there was one day of practice out in Henderson at the Raiders practice facility. Now, To remind folks, this is like 2 weeks after the season ends for teams that, aren't in the playoffs. And
at like 7 a.m. when everybody's gone.
7:45 a.m. We're walking in. Practice started at 8. There was one guy in the weight room because the weight room has all like glass garage doors. It's like 8 bays of glass garage doors. And there's one guy in there, and he was already well into his workout. He was well into a lather already. He was getting close to done at 7:45. It was Max Crosby. And he came out and talked to people later after he showered and whatever else, but he was the only guy in that weight room. And so he is the opposite of, oh, you gave me a big contract, I'm going to ease up now. He's like, oh, you gave me a running mate, I'm going to go even harder. And that should scare people because Crosby was already like close to unblockable in certain games. He is not the physical specimen that Myles Garrett is, but he's darn close. He is an incredible athlete and puts in the work. Technique, understands the game, continues to learn, just right there. And now that he's got somebody else that defenses are going to need to focus on in a way that they haven't in the past, I think he's gonna ascend in the same way that you talked about, Big Q being able to really get into that conversation. I think Crosby wins it this year.
One of the more fascinating week 1 matchups, not just like team versus team, but like player versus player, is Joe Alt versus Max Crosby for 70 snaps. That's what we're getting week 1 because Crosby lines up over there and generally he doesn't leave. So welcome to the NFL, Joe. Like you're getting one of the best immediately. That should be a really, really, really fun matchup, especially because Joe Alt, like if I didn't have to pick a quarterback for Offensive Rookie of the Year because it's Caleb, and who else am I going to pick? Alt would have been in consideration if we're just talking about like who's going to be the best rookie offensive
Speaking
player.
Of really hard to win awards, offensive linemen have to be like ungodly exceptional. They have to be like demigod level to win because they're overlooked in general as a position. And as a rookie, there's the earn your stripes part and there's always somebody flashier to look at. But I'm with you. Alt, I think we're going to know. And one of my favorite quotes was last year, in one of the NFL produced pieces, they'd captured an offensive line coach, and he said, "Look, man, there's a werewolf across from you every week. Like, there's no breaks, right? You're going to see superheroes every week lined up across from you. It's not going to be like, 6 weeks from now, like in college. 6 weeks from now, I'm going to see that top, defensive draft prospect, and I'm going to have to bring my big boy pants on that day and play really well. No, like, week 1, Joel. Oh, it's Max Crosby. Who's in week 2? I guarantee there's another one, right? And it's just not going to stop. That's the way the NFL is.
Actually, I'm very curious now. Hold on. Let me look up who his week 2 matchup is. All right. It's the Panthers. So, okay. No Brian Burns, All right. We'll take that week off against Carolina. Week 3 is TJ Watt. Week 4 is Chris Jones. Week 5 is the Broncos.
Your 3 out of your first 4 weeks are Max Crosby, TJ Watt, and Chris Jones. Welcome to the league, Rook. Let's go.
Oh, just casually has to go against Myles Garrett and Trey Hendrickson. And then Baltimore,
there's always, there's no shortage. So that's the difference between college and pros is everybody you're facing was the absolute best. They were their conference winner. They were the national award finalist. Like, that's who you're going to see every week. Like, that's just the reality of the league.
Our last award, MVP. I want to preface this by saying, again, this is the award that probably should go to Patrick Mahomes every single year. They're not going to vote for him every single year because the media gets bored and they want to highlight some other people, right? It's the same argument for Offensive Player of the Year. Like, he could win it every single year and it would be valid. Hell, he probably should have won it last year. Like, they won the damn Super Bowl, with an offense that they built in a cave with a box of scraps. Like, it's Patrick Mahomes, right? But similarly, Tom Brady only got 3 MVPs in his illustrious 2-decade-long career. And he pretty much only got them when they were forced to give them to him. Right? There was 2007. And I'm being completely serious about this, by the way. Like, they were forced to give him they didn't like voting for him for MVP. They really didn't. They always gave it to, like, okay, Tom's over in his own category. Who's like the second best guy that we also want to put in the conversation of, like, who's the rival, right? Whether it's Aaron Rodgers or Peyton Manning. Like, it was never Tom. In 2007, they gave it to him because that was, when they had like the Randy West pop off year where he threw for 50 touchdowns and reset all the record books. They're like, okay, we have to give it to him, right?
All right. I guess we'll give it to Tom.
That was, it kind of is what it felt like, right? And then he tore his ACL the year after. So then like, okay, cool, we can give it to somebody else. They didn't give it to him again until 2010, which again, that one, honestly, that was the one MVP where I felt like they kind of did a whole like tip of the cap to him, because that was the first year of the Boston TE party. It was rookie Gronk, Ricky Hernandez. Their number one receiver was like Deion Branch. Their number one running back was like Ben Jarvis, Green Ellis, and they still went 13-3 or whatever it was. So they're like, okay, yeah, you had a crazy year with an offense with no 1,000-yard receivers, similar to what we saw Mahomes do last year.
Yep.
So they gave him the MVP. He didn't get another one until 2017 with I don't want to say pedestrian, but like not a crazy stat line. He put up 32 touchdowns and 8 picks. The only reason he got it is because he led the league in passing, because it was just a down year for passing overall, and there was no crazy running back or receiver season. So like, okay, I guess we'll give it to Tom. But there was a whole bunch of other years in there that they could have given it to Brady, and they didn't.
Yep.
And I think the same thing is going to happen to Mahomes. They'll throw him one every like 6 to 7 years when they feel like they have to, and then they'll go back to giving it to whoever the second best quarterback in the NFL is. So for that reason, I'm not giving it to Mahomes.
Okay.
And I'm going to give it to Joe Burrow. I think he gets his first MVP. So we're going to have 2 MVP quarterbacks in the AFC North. I think it's very possible, not even possible, based on what I think of these two teams, I think that's the AFC Championship matchup. I think we're getting Burrow versus Mahomes in the AFC Championship, MVP versus MVP, very highly paid man versus very underpaid man. Not to say that Burrow doesn't deserve MVP. I'm just being realistic about it. Like, it should be Mahomes every year. But in the absence of that, I think the second best quarterback in the NFL this year is going to be Joe Burrow. He's going to get his first award for it. And I think Cincy is going to loudly reintroduce themselves to the NFL media that seemingly forgot they existed this summer.
I think Burrow will have a big-time resurgence season. Obviously, he was out last year with injury, but I think he is going to come back sharp. I do not think that is going to take a long time. I'm not going to overthink this one as much as you did. I'm just going to give it to Mahomes because, look,
coward,
what he did last year. Is it though? Really? Is
no,
it really?
it's the realistic answer. It's what should
acknowledging
be,
that Mahomes is the best player in the league and everybody else is playing for second. And most of the players in the league, now this is a very ego-driven league, most of the players in the league will say exactly the same thing. Look, we might be bored of talking about it. We might, no, that guy's going to be able to do things that all of the rest of us mutants can't. So we're gonna give him his flowers and say, yeah, is what it is. He's just Mahomes. You hear that all the time. Oh, it's just Mahomes. Like, we've come to expect the completely sort of intergalactic, impossible play out of him, and we just dismiss it now because we've seen so many of them already that we just go, look, it's just Patrick. There's no other explanation. Like, it's just him. He's just him, like, in his own category. So I just gave it to Mahomes. I want to see Burrow play a full healthy season. I love Joe Burrow and have since his time at LSU. And I think the NFL is better when there's a rivalry, when there is a threat to Patrick Mahomes' dominance. And, Burrow and the Bengals, when Burrow's been healthy, have been that, right? They've been the team that, I don't want to say has their number, but has been able to reasonably challenge them. And the NFL is going to need that. They're going to need it quick because the Chiefs were, down powered last year and still won the championship. So don't think that the league isn't a little skittish about, the Chiefs going on a long run here that is going to, turn people off from them the same way that people got turned off from Tom and the Patriots. It's appropriate that you were talking about him in this conversation as well. So the NFL very much wants a foil here. And a healthy Burrow could provide that. a successor. I'm not going to go that far, but somebody that can give him a game and scare him a little bit is necessary.
I saw an interesting tweet a while back so Burrow's been in the league for 5 years now.
Mm-hmm.
This was his first normal offseason and training camp. Between all the injury, like the typical summer injury that he would get, plus the 1 year where he was rehabbing from the ACL, and then his first year was the COVID year. This is his first, this training camp was his first normal training camp that
he's the Brock Purdy of the AFC.
It's crazy. Like we're in year
Purdy's
5,
the same way,
and he had a normal August.
Yeah, that's Purdy in year 3. So yeah, it is interesting, and I do believe that he will be very sharp, very focused, and I think he is. I don't want to say recommitted because I don't think he was ever uncommitted to the cause. He's always been laser focused on being the absolute best he can be. But there's a little bit of an edge there because people have forgotten. Like the Bengals have largely fallen out of that conversation, and it's because, and it happened like as soon as Joe got hurt, and the Bengals kept playing good football. Mm-hmm. And I think that stuck with him. Like, this is a good team. I have a good head coach. The defense is really good. Our defensive coordinator is great. Like, you shouldn't have stopped talking about us all, and I'm gonna make you remember. I think that's coming.
Well, that brings us to Super Bowl matchup. Again, I mentioned that I think in the AFC Championship, it's going to come down to Cincy and Kansas City. So, who wins that game? I'd be stupid if I picked anybody else. Kansas City.
Yeah.
Even if I only half believe that they're going to go to 3 straight Super Bowls, and that's a slog, right? Like that is almost statistically impossible to do that in the modern NFL. And yet, if anybody can do it, anybody, it's him. So, out of respect for literally everything we've seen in the last 6 years during the Mahomes reign of terror, or if you live in Kansas City, the golden years.
Yes.
I'm going to say they make their 3rd straight Super Bowl. Actually, or would it be 4th straight? The fact that we're losing count, by the way, is insane. Let's just say they make another one.
Remember.
It's like, was this the 5th, 5 out of 6 years, 4 out of 5? I don't know.
Yeah. That's
Either way, I think they make it. As for the NFC team that they play against, I'm going to go with the LA Rams. I think it's going to be Rams Chiefs, and I'm on the spot. I'm going to pick a winner. Again, out of respect for whatever demon he made a deal with a few years ago. I'm going to go with the Chiefs. I would feel sick to my stomach if I picked somebody else at this point and then they went and did the damn thing again for the 3rd straight year. So I'm going to pick the Chiefs. They're the best team in the league. Well, arguably the best team in the league. But, once the calendar flips over to January, they are the best team in the league. So I'm just going to stick with that. Again, for the sake of parity, I would love to see somebody else go on a run, but until proven otherwise, what else do you want me to do?
I'm with you on the Chiefs. I am not going to pick against them. I think they are a stronger team on paper than they were last year by far, and they still won it last year. So I think they have a more dominant regular season and continue to march because they are one of, if not the best teams ever in December and January and now into February. So AFC, we don't have to spend a lot of time talking about. I believe the Chiefs will go. On the NFC side, it was a lot harder. I would love it if the Rams did it. Like, that would be a great story for McVay and the Rams. I think Stafford would probably retire at that point. I think he'd be silly not to. It's a great way to go out on top.
I think if they're going on a run, AD might unretire for a couple months. I think he's like, hold on, I might be able to get another one here. Yeah.
Right. That'd be good. Maybe I retired a year too early. No, I think if the Rams would be a great story, I would be all about that. I'm going to pick the Eagles. And it's not, Ooh. I don't love it, but I think they could do it. I don't believe they challenge the Chiefs when they get there. Like last year, it was a game last year. San Francisco was there and they had a real chance to win that game. Like, they didn't, but they could have. I don't think even if the Eagles, a resurgent Eagles team that powers through the NFC East and the NFC playoffs, gets to the Super Bowl, I don't think they match up particularly well against what the Chiefs are going to do. I would say the Chiefs win their third at that point.
I love how we spent half this podcast just shitting on the Eagles while still picking them to win the division and to go to the Super Bowl. If that's not the most like Philly sports thing ever.
It's an echo of last season. We spent the first half of last season saying, the Eagles are winning, but they don't look very good. They don't look the same. I don't think they can keep this up, but they were still winning. And then the second half of the season was a complete train wreck, but we're familiar with this dance.
It's the only time I can remember seeing a team that was like 10-1 or 11-1 and be like, do they suck?
Yeah, are they?
They're such a weird team, man.
It was a very weird team last year. I think the weirdness evens out a little bit. That gets them at least deep into the playoffs. I believe that they have a chance to represent the NFC. Again, the NFC is harder to pick. I would be thrilled if there was an upstart NFC power. Like, that would be really cool.
Hold on. Packers fans, clip that and then make sure to play it back for them in a few months when that inevitably happens.
I think that would be a good Super Bowl, arguably maybe better than an Eagles-Chiefs Super Bowl. Like LaFleur going after Spags. I'm sorry. I'll get the popcorn for that. I don't want to see the Packers in the Super Bowl. I certainly don't. But do I want to see Matt LaFleur going up against Steve Spags in the biggest game of the year? That's not a bad ticket, man. Like, that's an enjoyable football game, and I love football. So there you go.
It's entertaining. And again, I'll give the Packers their run this year because I think Caleb's coming eventually, sooner rather than later. I don't know if it'll be 2024, but 2025, 2026.
I think they've got a legitimate shot, even in a very tough NFC North, at being a wild card team. I think they could make the playoffs as a final seed. Like, I think they're that good this year. And then I'm with you. They're in no way prime. This is the beginning of the window for them.
I think a wild card game, or not even wild card, I think a division round game in Green Bay between the Packers and the Bears. I mean, you want to talk about like record
let's
viewership.
Go. I would be sleeping on Tom Grassi's porch at that point. Oh, man.
Which I think I thought I saw sorry, not to get sidetracked. We love Tom, good friend of ours. I think I saw that he's still doing one last season in New York, and then I think
he's not moving until after the season. This is his final season in the house that he started in 10 years ago. He has purchased a house in Green Bay and will be moving there after the season. But we were, in that hypothetical that we were just discussing, I believe that would be next year anyways. So Tom will be well settled in at that point. I was going to
say, if we go out for the draft, we'll have to pop by and say,
100%. Like, that's happening already. So,
all right. Well, that'll do it for today's show. Inevitably, we will be wrong about most of this. And that is why we love NFL football so much, is because you really never know what's going to happen. It's the best reality show on planet Earth because nothing ever goes like how we expect it to go. And in true bootleg fashion, we expect you guys to rub our noses in it in 5 months when you clip all of our terrible takes and play them back for us. So we look forward to everything that we're going to be wrong about. I would love for you guys down in the comments below to post your division winners and your award winners so that we can equally roast you for being equally wrong. Fair is fair, after all. Other than that, I want to thank all of you for watching and listening this late in the episode. I want to thank Underdog for sponsoring. I want to thank Homage, our clothing partner, for also sponsoring. You can get bootleg merch there or merch for your favorite teams at Homage using the QR code somewhere on the screen right now or the link in the description.
By the way, I have a killer t-shirt for our first podcast of the year coming from Homage.
Oh, that reminds me. I forgot to tell people what our actual recording content schedule is this year.
Oh, yeah. We should probably do that.
So EJ and I realized that all of you want to hear from us earlier than like Wednesday at 4 p.m. Eastern. So we have committed every Sunday night, we're going to record like a quick and dirty recap reaction type pod every single Sunday night. Going to try to get that out in the wee hours of Monday morning for you guys to start your weeks. Of course, we have the Thursday night streams that are returning this year, and then we're still doing the Friday preview episodes as well, previewing the upcoming weeks. But The recap pods, you guys wanted them earlier, so we're going to give them to you earlier. Luckily, we're both West Coast, so we can record those at like 10 p.m. Sunday night. Try to get them out by, probably 4 or 5 a.m. Monday morning. We're going to do our best for that. But that is our plan for this season. Just trying to give you guys more of what you love, but at a little bit more digestible pace. So with that, thank you all. We'll see you back here Monday morning after week 1, reacting to all the craziness that will inevitably happen in week 1. And until then, later.